For the past few years, we've been doing a study on the book of Revelation. We have now come to chapter 22, and this is our final chapter in the March 2004 edition of our magazine. This 22nd chapter is absolutely as interesting as any of the other chapters that preceded, even though we have come to the final one. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me, Behold, I come quickly.
And J.R., let's set the scene by reading the first two verses of chapter 22. And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. Verse 2, and in the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. What a beautiful picture.
Indeed. The river of flows from the throne of God down through the middle of the New Jerusalem. And the tree of life that grows, I think that's an orchard full of trees, that grow on either side of that river, seem to be together. It would be difficult to discuss one without the other. But first, I want us to take the term rivers and look at it, because a river is essential to early mankind. And here in the holy city of New Jerusalem, there is a river. Well, you know, early man traversed the rivers and the waterways to make his way around the world. Before there were highways, before there were the ships of the desert, the camels, mankind also traversed through boats and on waterways. We know that in the Garden of Eden there were 4 rivers that watered the garden. And of course, I guess one of the most fascinating rivers is the one written in Psalm 46 and verse 4 about Jerusalem. Even Jerusalem is associated with a river, where the psalmist writes, there is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacles of the Most High. And Gary, to me, the rivers are essential because most cities were built along rivers. After the Tower of Babel, after mankind began to disperse throughout the world, they traveled the rivers of this world to get where they were going.
Yeah, and nations are defined by their rivers. You think of the Volga of Russia, and you think of the Rhine in Germany, and it's called the Rhineland in Germany, or the Danube, or the Mississippi, which really defines America. There's east of the Mississippi, west of the Mississippi. Yeah. The Amazon River, and along that Amazon and down toward the mouth, the civilizations sprang up. So rivers define great civilizations.
Yes, and the Ganges, you know, brings to mind, and then there's the Nile.
Yes.
One country comes to mind when you think of the Nile.
Right.
You know, so absolutely the rivers were important, and I think for this reason, since it is so important throughout the history of mankind, God tells us there is a river in heaven. And of course, many of the great hymn writers have written to memorialize the Jordan River, which is typical of this, of one of the great rivers of the Bible. For example, Thomas Ramsey once wrote, when I come to the river at ending of day, when the last winds of sorrow have blown, there'll be somebody waiting to show me the way. I won't have to cross Jordan alone. Yeah. These, you know, just the concept of the river, crossing over to the other side, leaving this life and moving on to our eternal abode is pictured with the river, isn't it?
It is, and there's something else too. This river is called the river of water of life. And J.R., I have studied water over the years, and of course scientists have extolled the virtues of water. It freezes at a certain temperature. When it does, the ice rises to the top rather than sinks to the bottom. And if it actually sank, all of the waters of the earth would soon become ice. And then at a certain temperature, water becomes gaseous, it becomes steam. It's a very special substance that God engineered for this planet. And yet there are other forms of water, for example, deuterium, which is used in atomic energy, which is still water, but it has a little extra atom in it. In other words, is it possible that the water of life is a special kind of water, maybe a cut above what we think of as water on planet Earth today.
You know, there's no reason to doubt it, indeed. And the Jordan River, for example, spoke of death.
Mm-hmm.
Baptism speaks of death. You know, a person goes down in baptism, they picture the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And the Jordan River starts in the lofty heights of Mount Hermon, flows all the way down to 1,200 feet or so below sea level to the Dead Sea,
mm-hmm.
and there it stops. It
That's
can't
right.
go anywhere. Samuel Stinnett once added to the songs we loved, as he said, "On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wistful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. I'm bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I'm bound for the promised land." And then, of course, the old spiritual depicting Elijah's flight to heaven after crossing Jordan. "I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot." Great, great songs, weren't they?
They really were.
So the rivers are vitally important. And this one especially takes us back to all the rivers of the past to think of all the life-giving substance and all the fish we could catch and eat. This is great.
Yeah, and this tree, J.R., now there are several things about the tree by the river that interest me. The river is flowing out of the throne of God and of the Lamb, which intrigues me right away because that's the source of the water, the throne of God and the Lamb. I don't even understand how that works, but I can't wait to find out.
Yes.
But here's the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits and yielded her fruit every month. That raises a number of questions in itself, does it not?
Well, indeed it does, because in the New Jerusalem there's not supposed to be any months. It says there's no night there, and neither have need of the sun or the moon. And but here we have months. You know, I don't really know. It's beyond our ability to comprehend, but it is possible that in eternity we will have some kind of time delineation. Otherwise, how would we know to make our appointments, whether they be with an old friend or whether they be with a congregation? If we say we're all going to meet on certain what, time, hour, day, week, it's just, eternity would, to me, be frustrating if we didn't have some way to calculate it.
Calculate the passage of quote-unquote time.
Yeah.
And we don't understand what time is in eternity. And there's so much we don't understand. This tree, J.R., this tree of life, we see it elsewhere in the Bible. That tree of life seems to have very special properties. Its leaves have special properties. I think, for example, of the olive tree, which is so much a symbol of the Spirit in the Bible. And nutritionists today will take the leaf of the olive tree and they'll grind it into a powder and give it as a tonic. And it's supposed to be a very good tonic. Now, if that's what the olive tree does, think about what this tree of life might do. What would its leaves do as a tonic?
Indeed. Well, you know, it's going to have a different fruit every month, and its leaves are for the healing of the nations. But that takes us back to Ezekiel chapter 47 as well, because Ezekiel says that when the kingdom comes, the Messiah is here, he sees water flowing out of the temple, on the right side of the temple building in the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, flowing down into the Kedron Valley. The Mount of Olives has been split in two. There's going to be a river running right down through the middle of it, going to the east, all the way down to the Jordan River and to the Dead Sea, and it's going to flush out the Dead Sea and bring it to life again. This is a river of life for the millennial kingdom when Jesus rules as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And Ezekiel says, I went out a little ways and I was ankle deep, went out a little way further, I was waist deep water, went out a little further, as water to swim in. And then Ezekiel says there are trees planted on either side of this river all the way down through what used to be the wilderness of Judea, down to the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. Surely they're going to have to rename it something other. I guess they'll call it the Live Sea at that time.
The Live Sea. Yeah, you know, J.R., this tree that Ezekiel talks about, Ezekiel, I guess, is 47:12. It's a special tree. The leaves do not apparently is not deciduous, it's evergreen, because its leaves don't fade and drop off. And also, its fruit is good for food. So this tree has seems to have all the characteristics of that tree of life in the New Jerusalem.
Yeah, well, listen to verse 12 of Ezekiel 47. It says, the fruit thereof shall be for meat, and the leaf thereof for medicine. So this, I think Jesus, when he comes, brings an orchard full of the tree of life and plants them along that river.
Wow.
Well, there's more. We'll be back in just a moment. In the book of Revelation, the river associated with Mystery Babylon is the Euphrates. And the river associated with Jerusalem, or the New Jerusalem, is this river that flows from the throne of God. You see, God has a river also. And then we come to this tree of life. This is a fascinating tree here, Gary, because its leaves are for the healing of the nations.
J.R., this tree is more than an ordinary tree in several different ways. If you go back to Genesis chapter 2, you find in verses 8 and 9, the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed, and out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to sight, good for food, that tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, there's that tree of life, J.R., and it's a very central feature of the Garden of Eden.
Indeed. And God said that if Adam, in his fallen state, were to eat of that tree, he could live forever. Which, means that that tree has some kind of eternal life-giving properties to it. And the fact that its leaves are for the healing of the nations. You know, there are some people today, Gary, who think that somewhere in this world there is a plant for a particular disease, and that all diseases a cure can be found for them somewhere, somehow.
That's right. Yeah, where would they have gotten such an idea, I wonder? Maybe they read the Bible, you suppose?
Well, you know, people go down to the rainforests of the Amazon looking for the cure for cancer, the cure for this or that or the other. The truth of the matter is there is a tree, but it has been removed from this earth. Adam could not eat of that tree lest he live forever. Now, there's another little term here, Gary. The Hebrew word translated forever is the Hebrew word olam. And in speaking, when God spoke of Adam eating of that tree and living forever, it was spelled with 3 Hebrew letters, but normally it's spelled with 4. The vav was left out of that forever. When we get over to the sons of God, saw the daughters of men, they were fair, they were great men of old. The words old there is olam spelled with the vav, meaning that those were not the sons of Seth, but angels who had fallen from heaven. They came from an eternal state because they were described as olam with a vav. So there's a difference here. When this river lets men live forever, this forever that we talk about here in chapter 22 of Revelation is the forever spelled with the vav, and the vav, of course, referring to Jesus.
And you know, there is much in Hebrew history that speaks of those fallen angels who came to men, and some of them were said to have brought illicit pharmaceuticals from the vaults of heaven, and taught men the arts of sorcery using what should have been healing or blessing chemicals that were used instead for hallucinogenic states and so forth and so on. And to this day, J.R., many of the pagan religions use plant materials to create that kind of a hallucinogenic state, meaning you can misuse what God has created. And you know, when the curse occurred, we find in Genesis 3:24, so he drove out the man, he placed at the east of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword, which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. God knew that if man had access to that tree of life, he would misuse its blessing and turn it into a curse.
Indeed. Now notice in the opening chapters of Genesis, we have paradise and the tree of life. And in the closing chapters of Revelation, we have paradise regained and the tree of life. Paradise lost, paradise regained. And the tree of life is an integral part of the whole picture, from the beginning to the end of the Bible. Makes a fascinating story, doesn't it, Gary?
It's a wonderful story. The grace of God, in spite of every effort by man to misuse the blessings of God, God in His loving kindness has preserved those things until that day when His blessing would once again be freely given after the great periods of judgment had befallen man. And so it is with great faith that we await this fulfillment. The tree of life, J.R., it's as though the vaults of eternity somehow come down and are brought into the timely kingdoms of this earth, and that's the tree of life in some way instills almost an eternal state into this earth. Indeed.
Now when we get to the very next verse, verse 3, he says, "And there shall be no more curse." Gary, the curse that came at the Garden of Eden is lifted. So here we see the absolute paradise regained for the paradise lost back then. And of course that brings us to another strange subject, because we wonder, if we're going to live in the holy city, New Jerusalem, who's going to live on earth? Or will there be anybody living on earth? And the obvious answer, from the very use of the term olam in the book of Genesis and following, to Abraham was promised the covenant of olam. And in fact, the Bible tells us that he was promised the whole earth.
Absolutely.
The whole world. He was heir to the whole world, which means that, yes, not only will the New Jerusalem be our capital, because the throne of God is there, you see, and anywhere there's the throne of God, that's capital city. But there's going to be other cities. There's going to be the earth. In fact, if we were not going to populate the entire universe, why would God make it so big? Something
Indeed.
to think about, isn't
a lot of people have wondered about that, J.R., and yet He may know something that we don't. He may have made it that big for a reason, and as yet we have no idea. One of the ideas that really strikes me here is no more curse, coupled with the idea that the throne of God and the Lamb shall be in it, that is the New Jerusalem, and His servants shall serve Him. The Greek word there is really to serve and to worship, sort of combined into one idea. And they shall see His face, and His name shall be in their foreheads. Wow, that speaks volumes to me, to have His name in the forehead, because that evokes other dark images that we've already seen about
like the mark of the beast.
The mark of the beast.
But here I think it simply, I cannot tell you that it's simply. It's so complex. But we reflect the glory of God. I think that's the essential thing here. That our bodies will be new. In fact, there was an old college professor once told the students, ministerial students, he said, when you preach on heaven, just let your mind run wild, because you just cannot get too far out for heaven. In fact, the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 2:9 and 10, "Eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of men the things which God hath prepared for them that love Him, but God hath revealed them unto us by His Spirit." In other words, your mind is not programmed to conjure up anything that is not real. So anything you think of, your imagination, let it run. Let it run. You cannot conceive of anything that is impossible.
In J.R. reading in verse 5, there shall be no night there. They need no candle, neither light of the sun, for the Lord giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. And this then concludes the first 5 verses, which are kind of a section unto themselves. And this is interesting. There is no artificial light needed there, and that would include the sun, which is an artificial light. And this brings us back to the question about measuring time. If the sun doesn't come up in the morning, go down in the evening, how in the world do you measure a day?
Yeah. You know, mankind developed the sundial, and then the little vase with the sand running through it, and then developed the clock, tick-tock, tick-tock, and now we got computers on our wrist. Well, can you imagine that these primitive gadgets, can you imagine the gadgets and the whatchamacallits there's going to be in heaven? It's going to be absolutely exciting. everything available at our fingertips in that day, the genius mind sprinkled across our culture today, everybody, it'll be commonplace in that day. Everyone shall know as we are known. There'll be a whole new level of communications. I don't think that radio frequencies will take the speed of light. I don't know if it'll be a speed of light. I think we'll be able to have instant communication.
Well, maybe the speed of light, and when it comes to...
that's tied to time, you see.
It certainly is. but maybe the speed of thought. And maybe it'll be, instead of Eastern time or Central time, God's time. Yeah. Who knows?
Wow. The holy city, New Jerusalem. Well, there's more, and we'll be back next week to tell you more about it. We'll be back in just a moment.